Hi everyone, this is RUOWEN. First of all, I want to thank our organizer and panel hosts for putting this together during the special time. So then I have this wonderful opportunity to share some thoughts on my research on the robot theater and eras and accidents in the choreographed experience on the stage. Titled The Theatrics of Brokenness, Performativity of Technological Defects in Robot Theater. And the following are my slides of a presentation, and I'm looking forward to your feedbacks. So, as essentially resonating with the burning questions of my own PhD research, this presentation focuses on the collapsed, interrupted, failed, and malfunctioning robot performances in the theater to investigate the technological deviance that challenges the normative paradigm of machines' high techno-performativity and its social imperative. So the presentation will concentrate on the staging of robots being broken, vulnerable, and out of control to understand how theater performance intervenes with the design heuristics of social robotics with their theater-based human-robot interaction methodology. And the point of departure was really when I was perplexed why the theatrical staging of robots are always in contrast to our familiar imageries of robots being invulnerable, highly efficient, and non-emotional. Instead, many humanoid performances in the theater and social practice are infiltrated with the storytelling and embodiments of dysfunction, vulnerability, and uncontrollability about the robot's frustration for dysfunction, their mourning over mortality, or their loneliness and despair for their own existential quagmires unveiled through the performance of robotic failure. And ranging from rough and abstract mechanical figures to delicately crafted social robotic products, from accurately timed robotic agents to improvisational and more cybernetic performances, from the choreographed breakdown on the stage to very realistic accidents taking place during the performance, theater becomes the testbed of robot fallibility for the invention of a kind of robot era scheme that solicits human users like us, human users' affinity. And this theater-based human-robot interaction methodology has also begun as early as in the 1980s. So this is a famous theater production by American artist Chico Morty. He staged the rusted, grotesque, mechanical style from late 1980s, using more than 60 units of hybrid robots to stage a crowd of primal humanoid and chaotic cacophony. In the beginning, the robots fails several times just to stand up again and again, and all the robot figures are also far from precise, goal-oriented, and orderly. However, the audience seemed to enjoy and feel related to their messiness and vulnerability with a touch of airy festivity. So let's come to a more realistic kind of perspective using the human-like social robot on stage. Almost all of the director Oriza Hirata's play depicts the convergence of vulnerable conditions of the humans, the fallibility of robots, and the devastation of the environment, particularly before and after Sayonara, a play made after the nuclear disaster in Fukushima 2011. In the play, the companion robot on the left becomes broken after her owner, a sick girl, which is on the right, after the sick girl dies, and the robot was sent to read poems for the dead victims of the catastrophe in Fukushima.
一 一人の時間が長かったからかもしれません。すみません。
まあ、君が謝ることじゃないよ。
すみません。
So these artistic expressions of technical disruption and the theatrical effect of tragic relatedness appear to become quite relevant to the social robotics design. And in some occasions, malfunctions are even featured as design heuristics to elicit empathy, attention, affinity, and affective output from the side of users, accounting for new types of social productivity and effective efficiency in the human-robot interaction. So just to give a more concrete example of designing the weak social robot, and also for the next slide, the news reporter was also one of the most state-of-the-art robot developed in the Ishiguro robotic lab in Japan, with, who has like a soft and innocent look, oftentimes also immersed in a melancholic mood.
Their robotic designs embrace the clumsy and flawed in a way that make people want to lend a hand. One example is a seemingly aimless and helpless robot called the Trash Can Robot. It is designed to see that litter is cleaned up, but with a twist. One objective behind developing the robot was to teach children to pick up trash themselves. The off-the-beaten-path approach to robot development taken by the university's Interaction and Communication Design Lab hinges on human empathy. It uses these clumsier, more enduring robot designs to tap into the human desire to help. It nudges people to interact and work together with robots.
So this mechanism of mirroring vulnerability seems to be joyfully embraced by today's social robotic design, with techno-optimism in contrast to the theater's post-apocalyptic aesthetics. As robots counter productivity and engender such design heuristics, the less than human and less than normal poorness invite us to facilitate and emphasize with the robot. So this vulnerability relatedness, or let's say fallibility relatedness, is set to help surpass the uncanny valley of unnaturalness of inanimate being or inanimate objects. But at the same time, we may ask, is this practice appropriating and reinforcing the less than human norms on the gendered and degraded bodies really the best way of interaction? Such observation of the intricacy between theater and the social practice of deplorable or tragic robots is where also the major increase apart. In my investigation of this theatrical enactment of fallible robot, it's serving a twofold research purpose. So, first of all, it is to study the theatrical robotic complex and its complicity in generating error-inspired design heuristics. That is to say, what does it mean for the theater to prototype human-robot interaction paradigms via staging robots' physical and functional disintegration? And how does such design principle would further impose social impact on existing norms and power dynamics through the production of ineffective robot bodies? So it all happens to me that under very considerable social grants from both the industry and the government, theater is positioned in a, or taking the example in Japan, theater is positioned in an ambivalent stance of not only embracing and problematizing social robotic products in the emerging technological infrastructure, but it also embodies an unachieved industrial ideal of robust full autonomy. In that sense, the brokenness, or what Heidegger calls torn to piecehood of technology, is also reflected in theater's schizophrenic encounter with the robotic industry. And from the theater staging to the social implementation, I coined this term techno-vulnerability to describe a capacity to understand, intervene, and criticize the trend in the contemporary technoculture and political economy that says that human vulnerabilities are unprecedentedly intertangled with new technologies, and that this shared vulnerability fundamentally connects us beyond the ontological boundaries with the more than human world and the inanimate bodies. And let's see how it works. For example, Stephen Cage's production Uncanny Valley stages this robotic copy of an autistic author. His name is Thomas Mell. Apparently, it adopts not only the vulnerable status of the author, who himself suffers from bipolar mental status, but the design strategy also stresses and imposes the robot's wired circuits in the air, trying to say it's no more than a piece of work in process and making it look artificially undone with humanness. So it appears as a natural subject to dysfunction and error. This trick has also been applied to the social robot Sophia. So I would like to ask, however, is techno-vulnerability really the best way for social robot users to relate to the reduced technological others? As we can see from the social labeling of vulnerable or the vulnerable in these cases, the process of appropriating a disadvantaged identity to the others suggests a less than status in the normative frames, being less than men, less than full-bodied, less than normal, less than efficient, less than socially smooth, and less than self-sufficient. All in the other way around, reinforcing the hegemonic subjectivities from the gendered and objectified human bodies to the robots. So we're also coming to my second goal of inquiry, which is to open up ways to theorize technological disjointedness from specific theatrical installments to rethink with the aid of performance study discourse, because I'm from a performative study background, and especially with the notion of performativity. And then to ask, how could technological disorientation inform the critical thinking on human technology continuum? And what are the biopolitics of such technological errors, defects, and accidents in the error progress operator or logic that is shaping our so-called smart culture and algorithmic future driven by infrastructural, sorry, what was that word again? Anyway, this next one. So I would like to start from the notion performance in the contemporary theater context. In the book Post-Dramatic Theater, the author Lehman articulates the core of performance as the interactive aesthetics of the life, which constantly produces the experience of the present or presence and the present in the theater space. This nature of theater performance, this concurrent experience of bodily presence, shared attentiveness, and environmental immersion designate the communicational process as the creation of an effective community. And in the case of the fragmentational aesthetics and choreographed eras in the Android theater, this effective community nudges the non-human inclusivity via strong effective outputs from the audience, while the choreographed malfunction, collapse, and breakdown appear to be the key of such communal bounding. So forwarding this Theatrics of Brokenness to cope with the challenges of social robotics. And this disjointed performance points to the possibility and contingencies of the robots to break away from the rigid mechanical rules, labor roles, and identity norms, thus envisioning the becoming organic of robots. So in that way, the robot theater of errors exposes everybody in the theater to the unexpected technological incidents. And therefore, using performance and performativity as the clicking points, I wish to illustrate how performance study framework could help us elucidate what robotic disjuncture mean from the stage to the wider social practice. So I briefed out 4 orientations to help illustrate the robot performance of areas and disjunctions. Well, first comes the norm-oriented perspective that addresses the faulty acts as the defiance of fixed norms encoded to the human and robot bodies. It's maybe quite direct to grasp just in almost all the robotic performances, and we have already come across it in the earlier slides. So let's come to an example from the performance artwork of Jordan Wolfsow's female figure that features a robot burlesque dancer in front of the mirror moving provocatively, and her outfit and repetitive moves are also suggesting the worn-outness of overexploitation in the repeated normative performance that shapes the female sexuality and objectification. Interestingly enough, the second time of my visit, so this is an anecdote, the machine actually was broken, so the exhibition had to be shut down for several days of maintenance, as if the machine herself is finally on a break or on a strike. And something similar also happened to my experience of viewing this piece of performance. The pharmacist robot selling drugs in Fries Verhoeven's Happiness. It's also playing with the normative identity of the pharmacist as a friendly and serious Asian woman, patiently catering her clients. Also, after a few days of this non-stopping performance, some technical issues finally occurred to a point that the robot was giving middle fingers throughout the play and rolling her eyes all the time. So the technical incidents of system breakdown and contingencies become participatory in the subverting of normative setting, highlighting the robot's escape from the docile machine. So the second framework from the productivity-oriented perspective of techno performances, mostly theorized by John Mackenzie. As we could recall together, of the clumsy robots, performance is actually seen to evaluate technology's functionality, while the inversion of the machine smartness and its natural correlation with high efficiency could nowadays point to alternative models of interactive paradigms that are reshaping the technology efficacy matrix. And with a third perspective from the integration or interaction angle, most noticeably in Karen Barat's work or Levi Brand, performance is seen in the dynamism of interactions between subjects, and that one incident of breaking down on a micro scale could be related to the entire disturbance of a total system. This configuration of the interactive and multi-scalar breakdown clearly sees its configuration in also many theatrics of robot performance. For example, Chico McMorty's organograph. So the aim of this statue, or this kinetic statue, is to use a machine-driven gear around a robot to monitor the climate change, actually with a greenhouse gas level relating to human activity. It is an actual clock in a sense that the installation is kinetic due to realistic measurement of the gas, correlating with the exhaustedly moving robot with the devastation of a planetary burnout, as the micro-macro breakouts are meeting each other and are intertwining within the human-centric industrial logic. Also, another embodiment in Hirada's theater play on the nuclear disaster, that the robot malfunction is entangling with the catastrophe of nuclear meltdown or the radiative leakage. To ask, how do we just live through these all kinds of damaged subjectivities from the human scale to the planetary magnitude? It's also informative to think the link of a robotic performance in the age of pandemic calamity right now. And The fourth perspective mainly sees performances or disorders in accordance with the natural tendencies of disruption, disturbance, or using information study related notion entropy, innate in the process of changes. It considers the state of the art or the smart technological systems as driven by the era progress operator to adapt them to a more open environment or surrounding. Therefore, errors and accidents are regarded as normalized components of technological evolvements towards the goal of machines becoming organic. It also elicits the question on the social and biopolitical consequences of encountering frequent errors and the fallout of these errors on different groups of people. Let's take two improvisational robot theaters as example in response to these concerns. On the left of the slide, in Wada Marinovsky's interactive robotic dance performance, these free-moving and alternative-looking robots in white dresses are embodying the inviting host, yet they appear somehow more like the hunting ghosts as they swirl around in reaction to the moves of the human audience. And in God Squad's robot musical My Fair Lady, on the right, the social robot, as a Broadway star and singer, experiences death and disintegration, then was revived to life again. The contingency, incalculability, and unexpected spontaneity challenge human as a host of certain knowledge and determinations while posing questions to a future machine decision making beyond human assurance. So we're coming to an end to conclude that through the performance lenses, the theatrics of robot brokenness could address us on 5 aspects. First of all, the errors on the stage, they are partly testing the inclusivity of robots in the social practice of affective community. And secondly, highlighting the repression of certain norms upon both human and non-human bodies encoded in the anthropomorphic design. And thirdly, they challenge the predominant standard of functionality and effectiveness. And fourthly, to reinform the interactive nature of breakdown in multiple scales and heterogeneous bodies. And finally, to acknowledge errors and accidents as innate in the logic of the open technological system, triggering the biopolitical questioning of which bodies are to be most damaged in the process of normalizing of errors and accidents in our algorithmic culture. So above is all the presentation for today, and thank you all for your attention.